In today's video, we're going to talk about title and escrow. I'm very lucky to have an expert in the whole field of real estate, including appraisals, Corina Rollins with me, who has been teaching and writing courses and doing all sorts of things.
I've been teaching at the College of Marin since 1986. I was an active sales agent from 1977 to 1986, and also an appraiser. I got trained by an economics professor from Hayward State University in appraising, and I got a real estate license specifically to become an appraiser. I am an assessment appeals officer with the County of Marin.
What I'd like to do now is ask you to help clarify, because in our area, they're called title companies, but they do both the escrow function and the title function. Just separate that for us a little bit and talk about how it's done differently in different parts of the country.
Okay. In Northern California, title companies generally handle both the title search and the issuance of title insurance. And then they have a subsidiary that acts as the escrow agent. And they really are two different functions. In Southern California, there are many more independent escrow companies, and the title companies do not generally have escrow branches or escrow subsidiaries. They strictly handle the title. Now, what the title does is it's searching the public records, and it's got to be understood, they're not searching private records. They're searching public records, which means those things which have been recorded. And in the United States, the county or its equivalent is the recording entity. So they are looking at the recorded documents and tracing what's called a chain of title, all those things that have happened about a property. The escrow entity is handling the transaction details and making sure that the monies are secure, that they are provided, that things are getting done and put into the escrow account, including the title report and the release of the title report, meaning releasing it to the buyer and the seller, and then getting everybody's approval of documents. But they are not themselves searching the title. They have an escrow officer who is in essence acting as a dual agent, representing the buyer and the seller, and the title officer who's representing no one and is simply reading the title report to make sure that those things that are in it are correct and that they are easily understood, and clarifying those things that might not be apparent, looking for errors, and you see plenty of them.
Let's talk about the escrow officers. They're also called settlement officers sometimes, right?
Correct.
And so they're like a third party making sure that all of the tasks get done. Can you cover kind of what the sequence or what the various steps are that they do?
Well, they start off typically by receiving a request from the buyer side. Just that happens to be who usually initiates the request to open an escrow. And for various reasons, not the least of which is that by giving the earnest money check to the escrow company, it frees the broker from having to put it through their trust account, and it assures greater neutrality in the holding and releasing of funds. So the escrow company will receive the check, the purchase agreement, which with the California Association of Realtors forms is entitled purchase agreement and joint escrow instructions. It's
Right.
the whole thing. And so that tells the escrow officer the steps to expect and the timeframes that are related to that transaction. The escrow officer, in turn, will assign an escrow number and order a title report. There's a couple of really interesting things that they do that are important, I think, to buyers and sellers. They will ask both buyer and seller to literally fill out a form that's sometimes called a statement of identity. And what they are doing with that is making sure that the Corina Rollins who's entering into the transaction or the Bernie Stephen is not the wrong Bernie Stephen.
So a lot of their work then also, if the buyer is getting financing, is with the lending company.
Correct. And the bank, again, will need to have some documentation that may not be apparent at first. For instance, if it's a prolonged escrow, they might decide a week before escrow is supposed to close that the appraiser needs to go back out and look at the property, or certify in writing that the value hasn't changed, or make sure repairs have been made, or they will want the spouse that remained on the old loan that exists on the property, if it isn't a sale, but say it's a refinance, that person signs a document releasing their interest, if any, in the property. So there's just a host of last minute items, literally up until the night before an escrow closes, at which point the title company will run another title check and the escrow company will require a lien rights check. And that lien rights check is making sure that no liens have been recorded against the property in the last 24 hours of ownership.
They're interested in how the new owners are going to take title.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah, yes.
Again, the escrow company will have a flyer that they can hand to the buyer that says, these are your choices in California, but they will not advise you what to do. If the buyer says, well, which do you think I should do? They will absolutely not tell you. They will say you need to talk to a legal advisor, and they do have different legal ramifications.
Yeah, and then when they have all of their paperwork together, which usually the last thing is they get the documents from the title company for the buyer to sign, then they call in the buyer for a signing, and then they also call in the seller for a signing.
Right, or they send a traveling notary to your house.
Right.
The negative, and this is from observation, of having a traveling notary come, which is very convenient, is that means that there is not going to be your agent or the escrow agent or the title officer there to ask a question of.
Absolutely right. And I make it a practice as an agent to accompany both buyers and sellers to their signings. And I've even done that to a location where there is a notary coming in for just the reasons that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Be a conduit who can get on the phone to the title company or the mortgage broker and help straighten things out if something doesn't look right. Now let's move into the kind of title policy that you might choose, because there's a basic one and there's an enhanced one. Can you talk about those differences?
Yeah, the basic one is called the CLTA policy, and it's cheaper. And so most people choose the CLTA policy, the borrowers do. Lenders want the ALTA policy, the ALTA. C stands for California Land Title Association. A stands for American Land Title Association. So it's easy to remember which is bigger. There are more than one kind, however, of ALTA policies. There's the lender's policy, and the lender's policy literally will cover things like boundaries, even if a survey wasn't done. And in the old days, and I'm talking 25 years ago, if a buyer got an ALTA policy, it covered that as well. Now it doesn't cover that unless there is a survey done.
And that's why it's so important to actually try to understand that preliminary title report. To some people, it's daunting. I've made it a practice to ask that whenever that is issued, that they provide maps of the underlying boundaries of the property and easements and the CC&Rs that are connected with that property, so that there's a fuller explanation of what the current title situation is.
And reports are showing you what they're not going to cover, what
Right.
is of record, therefore you're informed of it, therefore they won't cover it. And they will say any easements or servitudes of record. Well, they don't even enumerate them. They just say, we're not going to cover any easements or servitudes of record. If you don't know what those are, and 5 years later, you discover that there is an easement that will prevent you from putting in a swimming pool, let's say, they will say, well, we mentioned it here. You didn't ask for the specifics. Yeah. So on the electronic title reports, you can usually have a link that will take you through to that information. But who are you to understand it? Sometimes an expert like, who's been practicing real estate for God knows how many years can't understand it either. It's complicated.
Well, often I can't understand it. And then I find that asking the escrow officer is not really going to give a satisfactory answer. Asking to be connected with a title officer, then you're talking to someone who speaks the language and can interpret all of those documents for you. Who pays for title and escrow in our area typically, but it's not absolutely the buyer. It's sort of the custom that when the buyer's agent fills out the offer form to not upset the seller, whatever, they will say, okay, buyer will pay both for the title policy for the lender, if there is one, and for the owner and for the escrow. But it could be argued that the escrow is serving both parties. That could be split. Sometimes the seller could be willing and asked to pay for it. So it's all negotiable.
Absolutely.
In terms of who pays for what.
Yep.
But I've had, you see listings in the MLS where the listing agent already has a relationship with an escrow officer and is saying escrow's already been opened at this and this company, and they're trying to steer the buyer there because in a competitive market, the seller has a lot of sway in today's market. Yes. And what I've always taken the position is, well, if I'm representing the buyer and we're going to pay for the escrow and we're going to pay for the title insurance, which is really to insure the buyer, then we're going to pick who that is. Otherwise, if you want to select who it is, then please ask the seller if they're willing to pay for it. Let me say, Corina Rollins, you are such a wealth of information about all subjects, and helping me do this video on title and escrow has been a great help both to me and to the viewers. So thank you, Corina Rollins. I really appreciate your coming on Broker Bernie today.
Yep, and it's very nice to have met you.
Likewise.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.